this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
If it's 7 o'clock Eastern time on a Thursday night, it's Hockey Time Machine. Hi again, everybody. And on behalf of Paul and Laura and Glenn, I'm Steve Paikin. Very happy to be with you tonight from Manitoulin Island on the North Channel of Lake Huron. Our guest tonight, just the third American-born player in NHL history to score 500 goals, the 8th overall pick in the '88 draft. He is a 9-time All-Star, a member of the United States Hockey Hall of Fame, having played more than 1,300 games in the NHL, with the Blackhawks, Coyotes, Flyers, Kings, and Sharks. And with that, we welcome from Del Mar, California, Jeremy Roenick. Come on in here, JR, and tell us how you're doing for starters tonight.
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying a beautiful day by the beach. And, you know, I've just got I got a lot of stuff going in my life and playing a lot of golf and enjoyed watching the playoffs this year. It's finally over, but you know, now it's time to get on with the rest of my summer and look forward to some fun things ahead. To, you know, maybe go to Europe to see my daughter in the next couple of weeks. But life is good right now. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. So glad you could do this. Let's start and pick up on your comments about the Stanley Cup playoffs. How many games? How much of it do you actually watch now?
I pretty much watched every game that was at least on television. You know, there are a few nights where I was doing things I really didn't catch a game here or there, but I follow it up every single morning. Obviously, follow the social media, watch highlights, and very abreast of what went on during the Stanley Cup, during the playoffs, obviously the final. So I still watch it very intently because I love the game. I'm a huge fan of the game and really enjoy watching these kids and how talented they are and how great the level of hockey can get. And, you know, I think for the most part, the playoffs were fantastic this year. Tell you the truth, I'm disappointed in the final, but leading up to it, we had some amazing storylines throughout the playoffs that I thought were a lot of fun to follow.
What disappointed you about the final?
I just thought it was really anticlimactic. You know, when you finish a final in 5 games, even though the last game was a 1-0 game, you know, game 4 was an overtime game. You know, not taking anything away from Montreal, I just thought it was an anticlimactic kind of matchup. You know, I really was disappointed in the Canadian government that they didn't allow a full building to be present for their national pastime and to bring the energy that a Stanley Cup final I think deserves, especially when your fans in Canada are the most crazy, loyal, dedicated fan base in the world. And, you know, you can have 20,000 people outside standing shoulder to shoulder with no mask, but you can only let 2,500 or 3,500 in the building. I thought was really disappointing to me. And it shocked me, actually, coming from the country of hockey. You know, they say it's Canadians' game. I thought that took a lot of the excitement away from the final. But we just didn't see a lot of phenomenal goals. We didn't see a lot of phenomenal playmaking, great goals. We saw a couple, but for the most part, it was a lopsided final.
Jeremy, do you think it disadvantaged the Canadians not to be able to play in front of a full house and gave an advantage to Tampa because they could?
No question about it. playing in front of your home fans gives you such a huge boost of excitement, adrenaline. It also can bring in a little bit of pressure. There's no question about that. But I would much rather play in front of my fans, knowing that they're supporting me, cheering for me, yelling, and getting my adrenaline up to the point where I'm gonna literally my energy is going to, probably get me to other places, big hits, blocking shots. You find yourself more accountable standing in front of your own fans, and you'll do more things because you want the appreciation and the respect of your fan base. And you saw what Nikita Kucherov and everybody else last night said, we're actually happy that we lost game 5 in overtime, or game 4 in overtime, because it allowed us to come back and win in front of our fans. And they played fantastic last night.
What was the most impressive thing you saw in last night's game?
Vasilevsky, to me, is he's taken the goaltending to another level. He is the best goaltender in the game. I agree with Kucherov in his post-game assessment last night. He is the best goaltender, even though he didn't win the Vezina Trophy this year. Marc-Andre Fleury was very deserving of that too. But Vasilevsky, when you have 4 shutouts and 4 closing games, and then have the ability to shut down other teams and win games by yourself, Vasilevsky has given an already extremely talented team that much more confidence. And when you look at goaltenders that you can put in net and you're probably going to win, I look back at Marty Brodeur, I look back at Patrick Waugh, I look back at guys like Eddie Belfour. These are the goaltenders that will stand up in the locker room and say, guys, don't worry, they won't score. Just go out and play and win the hockey game. And I can see Vasilevsky, even though he's probably not that brazen, probably had that attitude. And last night, again, just he beat out, again, another world-class goaltender in Carey Price.
I actually thought about you a bit, JR, last night during the post-game press conferences, because I don't know if you saw what Kucherov did.
I did.
But he went into
it.
You did. Okay, well, there's a guy who clearly doesn't mind showing a little personality, like you. There's a guy who was happy to be sharing his opinions, like you. I don't know if you've ever done a post-game press conference shirtless and slugging back a beer, but what'd you think of it when you saw it?
I think it goes right along with the history and the level of excitement that you're going to get from winning a Stanley Cup. Now, we saw how Alex Ovechkin and the Washington Capitals celebrated after they won, and even though it was the second year in a row, the excitement that Kucherov showed last night, the excitement that Ryan McDonough showed last night, Stamkos showed last night. When you win a trophy like that, and trust me, I know, because I know how much work I put into trying to win one and wasn't able to do it. You really don't care about what you're saying, what you're doing, or what people are thinking. What you just went through to win the hardest trophy in sports outkicks anything that you would care about after that. You're running with a full deck. And Kucherov last night, he doesn't have to worry about what people said. He just won a second Stanley Cup, and probably was on some people's list of being the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. Him and Braden Point and Vasilevsky, I think, were probably the main people that people would have picked. So, but I think that's what hockey misses, is personality like that. Because Kucherov in a normal press conference or in a normal interview would be more subdued, and he wouldn't be as maybe as open to such crazy rhetoric, if I could say that. But I enjoyed every single minute of it, and I think a lot of people enjoyed every single minute of it. And I'm sure a lot of people say, why don't we get that more often? So good for Kucherov.
Well, I wonder, in the previous rounds, Philip Deneau from the Canadiens used to bring a couple of slices of pizza in after he'd won a series. And again, that showed some personality. Maybe you can take us back to your own experience. Does anybody ever tell you along the way, tone it down, don't bring out so much personality, we don't like anybody standing out ahead of the rest of the crowd?
Along the way, yeah. And I've had it said to me a lot along the way. Ken Hitchcock didn't really like certain aspects of my personality, whether it was dancing in the locker room before the game, or whether it was being extremely honest and brutally honest in front of the media. Some players at some point didn't like my antics because I would scream, yell, sometimes call other players out, call myself out, and you know, it's more of giving the entertainment for me. There's some guys that just they don't want to see somebody take their persona and try to overpower the rest of the team, and that's just old time thinking. And there's old time thinking of how you play, and then there's old time thinking of how you entertain. And I was always one that I wanted to give the fans what they wanted. They wanted honesty, they wanted personality, they wanted somebody that they could talk to. They wanted somebody that will show them the appreciation and the respect of acknowledging that they're there, and appreciation that they were there. And I had no, I miss that about the game. I miss that about the fan interaction, because when it comes down to it, it's an entertainment. People pay a lot of money to go watch games. They pay a lot of money to get games on television. They pay a lot of money to buy merchandise and shirts and whatever the case may be. And if we don't give them something to get entertained about, if we just give them the blah, cliched mumbo jumbo, you're going to lose a lot of people.
That's 2 in a row for Tampa. In a salary cap age, in your view, does that make them a dynasty?
I don't think it's a dynasty yet. I think they're on their way to it. I would say it gives them a few years to become a dynasty. The Chicago Blackhawks, I think, from 2010 to 2016 became a dynasty. When you win 3 cups in 6 years, that to me is a dynasty. 2 in a row is pretty good, but I don't think that anybody's sitting here thinking that the Pittsburgh Penguins with Crosby and Malkin are a dynasty when they won 2 in a row. But I think it gives them a buffer of a couple years. They win another one in the next couple of years, I would definitely consider them a dynasty, yes.
Does a guy in your position actually cheer for any particular team at the beginning of the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Yeah, for sure. I'm always very loyal to the teams that I played for, a lot, because you grow to love the jersey, the uniform that you wear, the fans that fill the stadiums, the city that you play for. You're not always in the arenas, you're in the cities, and you kind of get a real relationship. And every city that I went to, maybe with the exception of LA, I had a very big relationship with the fan base. And so I mean, this year was no different. I didn't have many teams in the playoffs that I played for, but I'm always rooting for Philly, always rooting for Chicago, always rooting for San Jose or Phoenix or even LA. But and in a nostalgic sort of way, I'm from Boston. I always want to see Boston play well and do well in the Cup. I love their leadership. I'm a big Bergeron fan. I'm a big Marchand fan, Tuukka Rask fan, and their coach Bruce Cassidy was my teammate back in the Chicago days. So yeah, of course I'm gonna root, and I'm gonna root hard. The finals came along, and I really didn't care who won, but in the beginning, you definitely rooting for certain teams.
Was there a player on either of the teams that made the finals that you watched play and said, that guy kind of plays with the same kind of fire and intensity and skill level that I did? And if so, who would it be?
Well, obviously, in a different kind of sense. I don't see anybody that played with maybe the ferocity, the love of hitting, being able to play, make goals, score, having the attitude, kind of that I had. But there are players that have, that same kind of goal scoring talent, playmaking talent, like a Braden Point. Point is a guy, I think, that you can put in any situation and be relied on. You can rely on Point in anything that you put them out to do. So I look at him in terms of an offensive guy that can also play defense. And I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed watching Josh Anderson play the final. Here's a guy who's struggled over the last couple of years. I thought Josh Anderson was arguably the best player for Montreal. His physicality, the way that he finished his checks, he scored the goals, he was in people's faces, he was barking at people. I I really enjoyed Josh Anderson and hope that this playoff year kind of springboards his confidence back to where he can be a more dominant player.
Well, that is, I should follow up on that because that's a big question that a lot of people, I guess not only in Quebec, but across Canada are asking now, which is, the Canadians were the worst team to make the playoffs and they went way farther than anybody, maybe even they thought they would go. Was this a fluke one-off, or do you see this as a team that's really got a great future still ahead of it?
Well, it shows why hockey is so great because there's so much parity in hockey. There's so many great players, and there's really, um, with the exception of the superstars, there's really not too much of a different level between second and third line players, or at times, the 10th to 12th forwards on each team. Same with the defense. So that's what's great about the game of hockey. When a team gets on a roll and starts playing with energy, with fire, with compassion, when they sacrifice, when they have a goaltender like Carey Price that just catches fire, their confidence rolls. I mean, we saw what happened with the LA Kings back in 8 years ago. They were the eighth seed. They got in like in the last day. They're eighth seed in the West, and they got in and rolled right to a Stanley Cup. So I think that's why we love to watch the National Hockey League playoffs, because it's the best playoffs in sports. Anyone can win at any given time. And I always say my favorite line is, hard work will beat talent 7 days a week when talent doesn't want to work. Well, that happens. That's why the Washington Capitals weren't there. That's why the Vegas Golden Knights beat Colorado. They outworked them. So yeah, it's that's why we love hockey. Basketball, you can probably pick two or three teams in the beginning of the playoffs that are going to win, and one of those teams will win.
Are you still at the point where you watch the Stanley Cup finals and you think to yourself, gosh, I sure wish I was out there?
I have not missed over the last probably 20 years, maybe even longer. No, probably 30 years. I have not missed one raise cup raising um, final game yet. And there's not one time that I do not sit there and I don't want to say jealous, because I'm not a jealous person, and I'm not jealous of these players. I'm actually very envious, and I have a lot of respect for what they do to win that cup. Uh, I should say I am actually jealous of Pat Maroon, who wins 3 cups in 3 years on 2 different teams, and he does it as a fourth liner. And I've played on some great teams as a first liner for so many years, and didn't only got one sniff. So yeah, I'm a little jealous of Pat Maroon and think the kid is awesome. I'm happy for the kid. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful person and a hard-nosed player. And he was an integral part of winning for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, every single game I watch, and I always want to be out there. And every time that cup is raised, I'm like, wow, that looks awesome.
Well, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on tonight is not just for your comments on last night and this whole Stanley Cup final, but also because, as you just referred to it, you did get a sniff of the Stanley Cup final in 1992 with the Chicago Blackhawks. You had the misfortune of playing a pretty good Pittsburgh Penguin team at the time. So just take us back. Before game one, the series hasn't even started yet. Before game one, how nervous is everybody?
Well, we weren't very nervous because we just rattled off 11 wins in a row in the playoffs, and that was a record, a win streak record that was held in the playoffs. So for us, we thought we had the upper hand, even though going in playing against a team like Pittsburgh, who in the long run had like 9 Hall of Famers on that team, and you look down their roster, and it was scary. But I mean, our roster was pretty loaded as well, and I was very confident we were going to win because no one could seem to get close to us in the games leading up to that final. Although I didn't really think about the run that Pittsburgh was on, because they also were on a 7-game win streak going into the final. As it turns out, we lost 4 in a row, and they tied our streak record. But again, I could see a lot of people saying it wasn't that close of a series, but every game was pretty much was decided by 1 goal. And that first game of the final, we're up 4-1, in the beginning of the second period. And you're thinking, here we're going to roll through another win and go to game 12. And then this guy named Yager and this other guy named Lemieux just takes over, and we end up losing 5-4 in that first game. And I think it kind of crushed our confidence. Like, how could we lose that one? And we just couldn't seem to catch up after that.
Did you imagine that almost 30 years later, Yager would still be playing pro hockey?
It's actually one of the most shocking. I think he should be the eighth biggest wonder of the world. I don't understand. And it shows you the love that the guy has for the game and the way he takes care of himself. Or maybe he's just bored. He's not married. So he doesn't have a wife that's telling her to take her on vacation or to retire. He loves the game. He loves the camaraderie. I'm a huge Jaromir Jagr fan, and I've watched him train. I'll tell you a funny story. So my family in July, a number of years back, went to Las Vegas for a weekend, and we're staying at the MGM. And all of a sudden, we're at the pool, and in walks Jaromir Jagr into the pool area. And it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he was coming in to do his workouts. So his workouts, this part of his workouts consisted of 1,000 one-legged leaps out of the pool per leg. And so he would do 100 each leg. Then he'd get out of the pool, have a coffee, read the paper. Then he'd get back in the pool. Then he'd do another 100 on one leg, another 100 on the other, literally leaping out of the pool with these one-legged jumps. And he actually took my son in with them, and my son did a couple workouts, not a couple workouts, but a couple reps with him. And my son, who at the time was probably 14 years old, he had to quit halfway through one of the reps because his legs just couldn't take it. It shows you the power and the strength and the fortitude and the crazy kind of workout mentality that has allowed Jaromir Jagr to play so long, because he is just a beacon of strength. It's amazing. He is an absolute beacon of strength.
Going to take you back to 92 now, to that Stanley Cup final that you played against the Penguins, and you've got through 3 rounds. Is there anything that changes before you go into the Stanley Cup final? This is it. 2 teams left. Any of the preparations that change? Any of the superstitions that change? Tell us about that.
No, absolutely not. Everything stays the same except the urgency. Your urgency has to go that much higher. Obviously, media hype becomes so much more intense. Your attention to detail gets way sharper. But I will say this, and I'll never forget it, because Steve Larmer, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, he said something to me right before the finals started. We were sitting in the locker room. He says, JR, he said, we got to take advantage of this final. Here we're starting game 1. We have to win this, because this might be our only chance to win a Stanley Cup. And I actually laughed at him. I was actually like, come on, Larms, I'm 22 years old. I'm going to have like 5 or 6 cracks at this. And Larms is like, I'm telling you, just don't take it for granted. We need to win this and seize the moment. And you know what? He was right. I never got another crack at a final after that. And, that became one of my messages to a lot of players when we were playing, and players that I would talk to when I was working on television, that were in the final. You have to seize the moment, and sometimes it's so hard to get there, and even when you get there, it becomes so difficult to win. But it definitely is the hardest trophy to win. That is not just a saying. It is no joke.
Do you know Dan Marino?
Yes, I do know Dan Marino.
Have you had this conversation with him?
We've talked about it on the golf course a few times, and you always go back to the greatest players that have never won a championship, right? And Dan Marino is always talked about that in hockey. Mike Gartner has always talked about that, and I'm sure some people refer me to that. It's kind of crazy, and I know and I know Dan, his career, just like mine, it's not based on how many cups I won or how many championships he won. The careers were still amazing, but it would have been nice to have a ring to cap off such storied careers.
Before you embark on the Stanley Cup final, I wonder if there's a moment where you actually visualize what's going to happen. Okay, we're going to win the Stanley Cup. My captain, Dirk Graham, is going to get the cup. He's going to hoist it. He's then going to pass it to me. And do you play that out in your mind?
You try not to. You really try not to. But when you're that close, when you really care and you really want something so bad, you can't help but falling into the trap of dreaming about it. Sitting in bed at night, laying with your eyes wide open, just, you're so close. You do think, what would I do with it? How am I going to react? Am I going to cry? You cannot help but dream about what's going to happen, even though there's a lot of work to be done.
Did the fact that it was a 4-game sweep for Pittsburgh, admittedly with all the games being very close, does that somehow tarnish the memory of it for you?
I think a little bit, no question, because it was kind of anticlimactic. We lost Game 4 in our own building in front of our own fans. I saw the disappointment on our fans' faces. I saw the disappointment on our team's faces as we go down into our own locker rooms. Retiring to our favorite watering hole to soak our sorrows in a case of Bud Lights or Coors Lights, and it was just there's no question you wanted more. To finish a final in Game 4 kind of really puts a sour note into what could have been a series of dreams.
As I watch the two teams shaking hands after the game, you can't help but note that there are some relatively long conversations that are happening among some of the players that know each other better. Now, my recollection of things 30 years ago was that didn't happen, but maybe I'm wrong. Do you recall any conversations had in the immediate aftermath of the game while you're shaking hands with the Penguins?
I always was the last in line. I was never first in line, regardless of whether I won a series or I lost a series. And I was always the last in line because I always wanted to have some sort of conversation. I was not one just to walk by somebody and shake their hand and continue to go, continue to move on. I was somebody that I wanted to tell them how great they were. I wanted to tell them congratulations. I wanted to tell them good luck. I wanted to give my admiration to players that just stood out in the series. And when we won, I wanted to try to console a little bit. You're always going to get more conversation from the winning team, and I think you saw that again last night. I think it's one of the greatest things in sports, that the handshakes after brutal battles, the respect that they show, the tapping on the shoulder, the hand behind the head, the whispering in the ear. That's you got to stay to watch the respect that's paid in that lineup to shake hands. And even though the frustration and the sadness and the disappointment that is in the losing team, you still see why hockey is the greatest game in the world with the greatest people in the world, because even though they feel awful and are mad, they still have the wherewithal and the respect to show their congratulations and admiration for the winning team. And it did not disappoint me again last night.
In which case, I should ask you about Billy Smith, who, of course, famously never liked to partake in that tradition. What do you think of that?
That's just being a sore loser. I mean, I think Billy Smith is one of the most ultimate competitors, especially as a goaltender. You don't want to go around the net when Billy Smith was in net, but you have to show respect in not just sports but in life, and to not want to be involved in a mutual respect situation like shaking hands. And it's history, right? It's what we do in hockey, and it doesn't make Billy Smith a bad guy, but it definitely doesn't make him my favorite.
Who on the Penguin team did you develop some real bad blood with over the course of that final series?
Well, Kevin Stevens broke my hand, my thumb with a slash, but I did not like him because I grew up with him. So I loved Kevin Stevens, but I had an anger for him during that final that, that he he definitely hampered my ability to play as well as I wanted to in the last two games. So Kevin Stevens and I, Phil Bork was another guy that just drove me absolutely crazy, and a guy that did his job as well as anybody. Larry Murphy drove me absolutely bananas because he made everything look easy, and at times he didn't even look like he was trying, and I couldn't beat him, and couldn't seem to get any kind of momentum against him. So those are the guys that I think about. I don't Mario you expect it from. Yager you expected it from. But there's some of these other guys that were just like, gosh, you know, it was just amazing to have to battle and get them out of my head because they seemed to be lodged in there and creating so much frustration.
Did Kevin know that he had broken your finger with the slash?
He probably didn't know it at the time, but I let him know afterwards.
In the handshake line?
It was more afterwards. Kevin and I are very good friends and have been for, since, early 80s. And, so we had talked after that. And he's like, I didn't mean to do it, Jay. I swear to God. I said, yeah, sure you did.
You're not quite believing that, eh?
No.
Okay.
He was a warrior. He played the game the right way and, was a great player in his own right. And he played to win and did whatever he had to do to win.
How about Tom Barrasso? The Penguins goalie certainly had a reputation for being, how do we gently say this, bit of a difficult person. How'd you get on with him?
Well, Tom and I were very good friends. Tom and I played on the Canada Cup together. He's a U.S. New England kid. There's only a few of us that came right out of high school into the National Hockey League, and not just from New England. I mean, Phil Housley did it, Bobby Carpenter did it, Tom Barrasso did it, I did it, and I think we had a bond of special things that we did to make it to the National Hockey League. And Tom Barrasso, as goaltenders go, the two craziest, I'd say the three nuttiest goaltenders I've ever seen were Tom Barrasso, Ron Hextall, and who we just talked about, Billy Smith. You talk about guys that will fight you, that you get around the net. They are going to slash you in the ankles. They're gonna take their sticks to places that sticks don't belong, and are gonna make sure that if you're gonna score on them or make life hard on them, they're gonna make life hard on you. And whether Tom was the most pleasant person, the most talkative person, to his friends he was. But he was one guy that he just loved to play the game, loved to compete, and he was one hell of a goaltender.
Even though you didn't win, is there any joy nearly 30 years after the fact in being able to say, I played against Mario Lemieux, one of the all-time great players in this game, and had a chance to win a Stanley Cup?
No.
How come?
No, because I've played against the best players in the world, and I feel that I could beat the best players in the world. I've beaten the best players in the world, and the fact that I wasn't able to do that in a series, in the biggest series of all time, I don't care who it is, just like hockey, you're disappointed you don't win. And granted, Mario is arguably, the top three best players in the history of the game ever to play. But, I could beat Mario in a one-game stand at one given point. I'm not going to beat him in an entire season if you talk about points and all that stuff, but you give me one shot and I have a chance. And unfortunately, he kept me from winning. Well, him and Pittsburgh kept me from my opportunity from winning a cup. I respect the hell out of him, but I hate that whole team because they kept me from it.
Well, speaking of points, I think you got 22 points in 18 playoff games that year. So do I infer from that you were pretty pleased with your own performance?
Yeah, I was pleased. There's no question. I consider myself a big time player, and I performed, better in the playoffs most years than I did in the regular season. So I did play my best hockey when the best hockey was supposed to be played. Uh, but again, when you lose as a team, and you look at yourself, and you're responsible for 1/20th, 1/22nd, and you can say, well, oh yeah, well I got my points, but you don't do that. That we lost as a team, and you always look at something that you could have done better, what you could have done more. You look back on the great opportunities that you missed, about maybe the dumb penalty that you took that led to a goal, and there's always some sort of finger that you can point at yourself that you always go back to.
I know this is not the way life really works, but I bet it's probably the way that an athlete's head works, which is to say, did you ever say to yourself, my goodness, I'd have happily given up 100 goals or 200 goals if I could have had my name inscribed on the Stanley Cup?
Oh, sure. There's no question about it. Don't get me wrong. Scoring 500 goals is an amazing feat, and only 4 Americans have ever done that. I'm very proud of that. Giving up 100 goals to have a Stanley Cup would have been an easy. I would have signed on the dotted line before you could finish the sentence. There's no question about that. You always want the ultimate goal. Personal accolades always come second. So I think most players you would find would agree with me on that aspect.
You weren't there to enjoy this, but of course the Chicago Blackhawks eventually did go on to have quite a dynasty, and they did win that first cup in 2010, first cup in many years. And I think one of the things people love so much about you is that you do wear your emotions on your sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were broadcasting that game, you really did.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could give us some insight into why it was so hard, even though you weren't playing for them anymore, to hold the tears back when Chicago finally did win that first cup.
Well, it's really easy. Chicago is kind of the team that I relate to the most, because they're the team that drafted me. There's always a bigger bond to a team that really stuck their neck out, put their trust in you, drafted you. And remember, Chicago drafted me 8th overall first-round pick as a high school kid that weighed 150 pounds. That just that didn't happen back in the 80s. There were people in the Chicago Blackhawks scouting staff organization that literally right before the draft would threaten that they would quit if the team didn't pick me. So there's always there's a loyalty to a team. And when I love the crest, I love that jersey. It's one of the greatest jerseys, sweaters in all of sports. And you have a bond to that. You sweat and you bleed on that crest to try to win a championship. And I told a story in my book when we lost that game 4 in Chicago to the Penguins. I left the arena to walk down the stairs, and there was a 10-year-old kid. I assume he was around 10, and he was crying, to his dad. And that's when I realized that it's not just the 20 guys that are on the ice playing for the Stanley Cup to win the Stanley Cup. There are thousands, maybe millions in the city that were breathing and couldn't breathe, waiting on every single play, that wanted to win that Stanley Cup as much as we did. And I saw that kid, and I realized this is not just a team thing. This is a city thing. This is the city's culture. And I just saw when that cup got raised by Jonathan Taves over his head, and saw that Blackhawk crest, the Indian head. It brought back a lot of memories, and it brought back, the sadness that I had and that little 10-year-old had. And, I just couldn't help to think that, everybody was celebrating, and hopefully that 10-year-old that at the time now would be 24 or no, 20, what was that? 19, 18 years. So yeah, he would have been 28 years old, was crying happy tears and not sad tears. So it was pretty emotional, because it's like a full circle mentality. And I wanted to win that thing so bad, and felt so terrible every year when it didn't happen. And, you feel a little guilt from there. So when I saw it, it just came out. Just don't know why it did, but it did.
JR, let's finish up with just some miscellaneous questions here. And you actually just opened the door to one of them I've always wanted to ask you, which is, you're the 8th round pick in the 88 season entry draft. How come you never wore number 8?
Good question. I think when you come into the league, you just take any number that they give you. And they so happened that, Sutter wasn't there anymore. 27 was open. They gave me 27. And, I was happy to put on any number. I came to grow and love 27. It became kind of my favorite number. Moving on to Phoenix, my son was born in 97. I still had a 7 in the number. Nobody else wore 97. So I chose to choose 97 because, again, it was kind of unique and it was a different number. And I'd like to have that. I'd like to have a 7 in my number somewhere. So that's kind of the reason why I changed.
I think you're the first NHL player in history to wear 97.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
Now, given that you're a Boston guy, do you wish you'd had a chance to play for the Bruins somewhere along the way?
So when I signed in Philadelphia in 2001, I actually had a contract offer from Boston that I believe was probably one of the richest contracts that the Boston Bruins had ever offered somebody. It was more money, quite a significant amount of more money than the Flyers were offering me. But at the time, they had just traded Billy Guerin. They were moving around some pieces, and I wanted to win a Stanley Cup, and it kind of put a bad taste in my mouth that if you're trading Billy Guerin or letting Billy Guerin go, how bad do you really want to win a cup? Billy Guerin's won 3 cups, one, a couple as a player, a couple as a management, but it just didn't seem to be the right fit at the right time. I would have loved it. I don't know whether it would have been more of a hassle being around friends and family playing in Boston, more pressure, cost me more money in tickets, whatever the case may be. But I felt Philly was the place that I best had a chance to win a Stanley Cup. And actually the 2004 team that we ended up losing to Tampa in game 7 of the conference final, I think was the best team that I've ever been on and probably the best chance that I ever had in winning a Stanley Cup. We just had too many injuries that year. Our defense was depleted. We had 3 forwards playing defense at the time. I had gone through major concussions, one in February and one in the game 1 of that series. And, we had a lot of uphill battles that we had to get over, a lot of hurdles. But it's pretty crazy.
You did, though, have the chance to experience some pretty wonderful things during your career, including a 500-goal milestone, a 700-assist milestone. You're on the Phoenix Coyotes Ring of Honor. You got that traditional one last shift in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So as you think back all these years later, how meaningful is all of that to you in terms of your own legacy?
I think it's great. Everybody wants to be acknowledged and remembered. There's no question about that. I'm very proud to be in the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame. To score that 500th goal, I was very close to, very, very close to not being able to achieve that milestone. That's another story in itself for another time. But, I achieved a lot of things that a lot of U.S.-born players, a lot of hockey players weren't able to achieve. And, you can't take those numbers out of the record books. You can't take my name out of the the list of scoring leaders in the history of the game. You can't take me off of the third American ever to score 500 goals. You can't take that stuff away from me. They can decide not to give me things, but they can't take away what I did. And I think I'll always remember that.
I'm just trying to think now. Broughton, Modano, you, and who's the fourth?
Keith Tkachuk.
Tkachuk. Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take you back to a very famous game in your career.
So it wasn't Broughton, by the way. It was Joey Mullen.
Oh, excuse me, Joey Mullen, not Broughton.
Joey Mullen.
Got that
Mike
mixed
Modano,
up.
Mike Modano, myself, and then Keith Tkachuk. Yeah.
And you and Mike have known each other a long time too, right? You played with each other when you were very young?
Like 10 years old. Yep.
Yeah.
10 years old. Amazing. Mike Modano to me is the best American player ever born on this, and I'll take that. I think maybe Pat LaFontaine might have been able to have that honor, but to me, Mike Modano was the most spectacular player that I ever watched as an American hockey player.
I'm going to ask our friend Glenn Dreyfus to roll some video of a game in the 2003-2004 season. This is the Philadelphia Flyers against the Buffalo Sabres. You know where I'm going with this. This is video that for anybody who saw what happened to you that day, they are never going to forget, because you got carved up but good, and obviously got so furious at the lack of attention by the officiating crew to what had happened to you that you tossed that water bottle onto the ice. I'm sure you've thought of this many times over the years, but what, if anything, could be done? And we heard lots of complaints during the Stanley Cup playoffs this year too. What, if anything, could be done to make officiating in the NHL better?
Well, first, let me say that officiating in the National Hockey League might be one of the toughest jobs, because there's a lot going on, and the speed is amazing, and human error is just a part of our DNA, right? We're going to make mistakes. I think nowadays with video replay, we have a lot of opportunities to make our errors corrected, or to correct our errors. What really bothers me is that referees, to the players and to the fans, don't have any accountability. The league protects them to a fault, and I think a lot of fans would love to see referees on a post-game press conference answering questions why they missed one call, or called one thing the way that they did, why they called a penalty in overtime, what their reasoning was, the mistakes that they missed on instant replay, and that doesn't happen. Granted, I respect every single referee. There's a lot I didn't get along with, but that doesn't mean I don't understand that they have a tough job. I just think that they're protected to a fault, to where you can't talk about them on television. You can't, as a player, you can't critique them or complain about them without fear of getting fined. And that play in Buffalo was a point where I got sliced up with high sticks 3 times in the game, and got a total of 25, 30 stitches and restitched. Like, I got 5 stitches, got recut again for another 12, had to go get back again, and went back again for another 10, or whatever the case may be, without one penalty call. So I was just at wit's end. And, I, like you said before, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'm going to let my emotions be known. A lot of people probably don't like that. I know a lot of probably people in the National Hockey League don't like me because I was that type of player, or that type of person. But I think you're not going to forget who I was, because I was that type of person. And for a lot of people, I was their favorite, because I showed that kind of emotion, that showed that I cared. I would rather have that than have no emotion whatsoever. So for me, I wish the league would just make the referees more accountable for the mistakes that they make, or at least let the fans know if they do keep them from doing playoff games because of their on ice officiating record. They do watch referees, they do rate referees within the system. We just don't see it. And I'm going to say it one more time: they have a tough job. And we do have some of the best referees in all of sports, but still, everybody wants to have that accountability, and the National Hockey League protects them, I think, maybe a little bit too much.
In the Vegas Canadiens series, when you saw number 94 for the Montreal Canadiens have his nose carved up and 4 officials on the ice and nobody saw it, no penalty called, did you think of yourself?
I did. And I also thought of Gallagher in the same situation. I mean, Gallagher, seeing his face all marked up and bruised and cut up, and that's how I looked all the time. And to me, there's 4 sets of eyes with striped shirts, and how you can't see it. And I will say this: in one of the later games, when Andre Palat took a stick at the end of Game 4 from Weber, it wasn't the referee that put his hand up. By the way, Palat had the puck on a stick, so how they missed it, I don't know. It seemed to me that it was the linesman who was standing right there, told the referee what happened, and that's the right thing to do. And I wish we just had more of that, because there are 8 eyes, 4 sets of 2 on the ice, and I think everybody should be able to talk it over to make sure that they don't get something wrong. That plus video, and then let human error, play a part of it.
A couple of more questions, if I can, JR. Number one, I think hockey fans will remember your very famous exchanges with Patrick Roy, where you two went back and forth and gave each other a couple of zingers. Did you guys ever talk after that and resolve any of that?
Sure. And by the way, we've always been friends, but we were severe enemies when we played against each other, because he was one of the most competitive players, not just competitive goaltenders, but one of the most competitive players I ever played against. And I would always let him know when I had his number, and he hated it. So whenever I scored a goal against him, I could see that his helmet would pop right off in anger. But he was one of those guys who's very, very confident in himself. He had an ego. He was not afraid to show it. He was not afraid to show how cocky he was, how confident he was. And I love that as a player. And I knew coming back at him, I just thought it was a great exchange of wit, great exchange of championship caliber shown by him, and championship ego showed by him. And, I think it's what we're missing, because people remember that, and they always will remember that. And I think, we got to have more of it.
Well, here's another thing they're going to remember, and I want my friend Glenn to roll the video of JR doing what JR did so well so many times. Go ahead, Glenn.
Said he's always dancing. In fact, he danced for us. Give us a little bit more. Jeremy. Now medicated. Reunited and it feels so good. Yeah, I'm looking for Washington.
Yeah.
Coming right up, Mike.
Yeah, I can't see him right now. Where's Mike?
He just ran out of here. Hold on, come here. Ooh. Maybe we have to cancel the game. Everybody, all our team is going to be scared. Oh, wait, kid! Come here, give me a little bit of that. You know you're hot. Well, good thing you're going to get that truck. The bad thing is you're going to be smiling all day on TV. Wake up already. It's a joke. Wake up. NHL, wake up.
When you look at all that, and that is personality that we just don't see very often in sports, what comes to mind?
Well, I know I entertain people. There's no question whether I entertained them on the ice with my play, or I entertained them with dancing, or entertained them with doing something stupid, something embarrassing that embarrassed me, but made somebody laugh. And that's all I wanted to do. Is I wanted to make people laugh. I wanted to make people happy. I wanted to make sure that people left entertained. So, and I felt that I did that day in and day out. And, some people like me for it, but some people don't like me for it because they think I was in it for me. But I wasn't in it for me. I was in it to entertain and to make sure that everybody had a good time. Now, when I got angry and said what I wanted to say, they didn't like that. But when I did something stupid or something ridiculous and made them laugh, or brought attention to the game, or brought attention to the sport, they love that. But to me, you can't have both. Either you take the good with the bad, and you accept it, and you go with it. But I think I brought a lot of attention to the league, sometimes negatively, mostly positively. But I think all in all, people can't look back and say that I wasn't 100% involved and engaged in everything that I did, both on and off the ice.
Well, I think we should leave people with a clip of you doing something you did more than 500 times in the NHL. Glenn, let's roll that one.
Great play by Steve Larmer to fend off a checker and then clear it to center. Here comes Roenick. One man to beat. Roenick in on Gdynia. A spinorama. He's around him. He's in. He scores! Jeremy Roenick! A great move as he turned the Soviet defenseman inside out.
Jeremy Roenick taking a page out of Dennis Savard's book. Terrific balance after being knocked down. Great spinorama move and bang into the net. A magnificent goal by Jeremy Roenick.
Where do you find the creativity or the inspiration to do a spinorama, get down on one knee, get back up again, and put the biscuit in the basket? Where does that come from?
It's called from Dennis Savard. Savoir-faire is everywhere. He was my guy when I got to Chicago, and watching him and seeing what he did and the creativity that he had. The only reason I would think of doing a spinorama like that was because Dennis Savard was on my team.
You know, we can't thank you enough for spending so much time with us. This was really a great thrill, and we love the stories and are so grateful that you spent so much time with us on the Hockey Time Machine. You be well, JR. Thanks so much.
Had a lot of fun. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, guys.
Take good care.
Bye.
Jeremy Roenick. Wasn't that wonderful? Okay, we are now pleased to welcome a true hockey legend. He has had his name on the Stanley Cup 14 times. That's more than anybody else in the history of the world whose last name is not Beliveau. 1,248 wins in the regular season and 223 more in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He is head coach of arguably the greatest dynasty in NHL history, the Montreal Canadiens of the late 1970s, who won, of course, those 4 straight cups. If there's anybody who can talk about the Stanley Cup and what it takes to win, it's this man. We are happy to welcome back William Scott Bowman to the Hockey Time Machine. Scotty Bowman, it's great to see you again. Where have we reached you tonight?
East Amherst, New York, just outside of Buffalo.
Fantastic. Let's start with this year's Stanley Cup final. And I wonder if I could ask you to sort of rate it in terms of entertainment value, tenseness of outcome, skill demonstrated compared to the many final series you've seen over the years.
Well, you know, Steve, hockey has changed a lot. The rules have changed. I mean, to try to compare things maybe 20 years ago as opposed to today, but a lot of things stayed the same. And to me, the adage about defense wins championships never showed more than in this series. And you know, when you think about a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, I've been watching them since I moved to Florida in 2005, and I've been watching them like grow as a team. They won the cup in 2004. Then they had some tough times with ownership, and then when Jeff Vinik bought the team, I moved down in 2005, and 5 years later, Jeff, I got to know him, and he hired Steve Yzerman away from the Red Wings. He was working with Ken Holland, and of course the rest is history. And Steve went back to Detroit, but you know, the stamp he put on the Lightning, I can't go over all the things he did. We'd be talking till 9 o'clock, but you know, he brought in Julien Brisebois from Montreal, and we know what Julien has done the last 2 years, but both of them orchestrated a program for the owner. He was not in a rush. I remember him talking about it, and Steve said that, you know, he went there because Jeff Vinik wanted to build a winning program, and you know, they were rock bottom just about. They had got in back-to-back years, though, they had got Steve Stamkos and then Victor Hedman, and then the rest. I mean, it's an amazing story. So to compare the eras, I think the defensive game, if you look at the Montreal Canadiens, I thought they played as well as they could. They were a team that was going to be very stingy. They proved it in Game 5, getting knocked out and losing 1-0. And that's the type of team that was successful for them starting in the playoffs. So I thought that the defense core on both sides, they were big, they were strong, they could play a lot of minutes, they were physical. They didn't take a rash of penalties, but they made it very difficult to get scoring chances. That's the way they played. I mean, Tampa had maybe played a few more. They played 6 most times, not evenly matched, but Montreal played a lot of games with 4 and a power play specialist, and one that played a little bit more. So defensively, it was a tough series for forwards. I mean, you know, Braden Point and Kucherov they're Hall of Fame players going forward for sure. But you know, Braden Point was on that goal scoring streak, and nobody tried harder. But you know, it's hard when you're going against big defensemen all the time, and they're always back, and they have help in front of the net, and then you top it off with goaltending of Carey Price and Vasilevsky. I mean, it's just. I thought you know, when you're looking for scoring, you're not going to, you'll find it sometimes. I mean, I've been involved in some Stanley Cups that were high scoring, and I was in some that were really low scoring. I started with the St. Louis Blues, and we would have been outclassed if we wouldn't have been playing solid defensively. And Montreal showed a formula. They beat Toronto. I mean, they went up against Winnipeg, and then imagine going up against Vegas. And the formula, when you get a team and the formula is working, you're not going to change. So I thought for a Stanley Cup final, it had excitement, because different types, because the defenses and the goaltending were really tough to crack. And as a forward, there was just no room at all.
Well, I asked the question because you probably just heard Jeremy Roenick say it was over in 5 games. There weren't a lot of good scoring opportunities. There were a lot of greasy goals. And therefore, through his eyes, it was a less than thrilling final. He thought the playoffs were pretty good up until then. What do you think of that observation?
Well, let's look at the playoffs. The Islanders nearly got to the final. They went 7 games with the Lightning. Really close, low-scoring games. Great goaltending at both sides. They had a really tough series with Boston. Boston was a real solid team this year. They got some injuries on defense, so they really couldn't match up. But when you look at the teams that were left, the defense cores on all 4, the last 4, let's go back to the conference final. Vegas may be a little different because they when you think about Vegas, I saw what Theodore did last year in the bubble. They had Martinez. They're more on the offensive side, so they might, but they still had some pretty good sized defensemen in there, with White Cloud and McNabb, guys like that. But they were able to play. Vegas played a good solid game, but it was hard to score. And I know what Jeremy's coming at. That for fans that want a lot of goals, maybe they're judging the game on saying, but the game has changed. I mean, the end zone's bigger. The teams protect the front of the net. You can't push and shove and cross-check guys like you used to in front of the net. But in the playoffs, I think what people have to realize is what happens to offense in the playoffs. Well, it can dry up. How? Well, let's start with the fact that goaltenders rise to great heights. Forwards open nets and they get a little tense. I mean, the scoring chances, you see the saves go, fantastic saves in the playoffs, maybe compared to some in the season. The penalties are tough to call. There's a lot going on. The referees have to judge what could, it's more like old time hockey where a penalty was only when a scoring chance was taken away. And we've cleaned up the game. There was too much hooking and holding, and they wanted to get some offense into the game. They've tried as much as they can changing the rules, but yet again, it's a combination of everything: pressure, goaltending, not the power plays. Look at the Lightning now. It's a good example. I go to all their home games except for the last year with the pandemic, but their power play is just about unstoppable. It was unstoppable. They had, I think it ended up 1 or 2 goals and 14 chances. And why? Because Montreal, video, scouting, and watching what they were doing successfully, they took that away from them. But they found ways to, the big thing with the Lightning is when you win games 1-0, it's an oddity. They eliminated the Islanders at home, and they eliminated Montreal for the Cup at home 1-0. And when you score 1 goal and you got to play more than 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes without giving up a goal, that's team defense. And I think that both of these teams showed they were teams. Do you know that the Lightning in the last 2 or 3 games, the line of Gord and Coleman and Goodrow were the leading ice time line on Tampa.
And why do you think that was?
Because John Cooper knew that that's the way they had to protect the lead, and they were very good defensive players. They come up with important goals, but maybe not as many. And Montreal was a team that played 4 lines. They played Danault as a checking line as much as they could, but you can't do it when you're not on your home ice as much. They might have logged a few more minutes than the other lines, but they were both teams. I mean, you know, and that's what I admired about the series is they both play. They counted on players to produce, but they counted on all of their players, and their defense cores were so big, so strong. And I would just mention it to JR, and I've talked to him on many occasions. I admired him as a player, and I also admired him as an opponent. I never coached him, maybe in an all-star game or something, but when we used to play different series against him, he was the most, you know, gracious loser for a guy that really played hard. And what he was mentioning about the lack of scoring, I think the reason was that the defense core were so big, so strong, and took all the scoring chances away. Because when you see fellas, Point and Kucherov, I watched them all season, not this year, Kucherov, but I watched them play quite a bit of late. Stamkos. These are really elite players offensively. And, you know, it was hard for those players to get through. And even on Montreal, Gallagher and those players that play hard, you were up against big defensemen that can clog up everything. It's a tough game, but doesn't mean a 1-0 game is not. I mean, I thought the games, the low-scoring games were exciting as a high-scoring game. And Islanders.
Last night was thrilling, to be sure. Last night's 1-0. What a nail biter right down to the finish, eh?
Yeah, because Montreal had one game 4, and knowing that if they could have just, I mean, you know, when you take a home team that's going to win the Stanley Cup and you play 20 minutes and you play another, what it was, 14 or 13 minutes, you're nearly at half the game and there's no score. And you know if Montreal scores an early goal, then it gets even, because Carey Price, you know, I mean, he's been a great goalie for a long time, and of course the other fella on the other end, I mean, when he needed to make the saves, I mean, you get 4 games that he got shutouts in to eliminate the team in its elimination game. That's something. So I
do you agree with him as the choice of the Conn Smythe Trophy winner, Vasilevsky?
I thought I mean I don't know all the stats in that, but I thought it was a great choice. I mean, it was I mean it's a tough choice because goalies very seldom win the Conn Smythe. It's not very often. I think it happened twice with myself. Glenn Hall won the Conn Smythe in a losing venture. He saved us from quite a few goals in St. Louis. That's a good example. You know, the first year we played in the expansion Blues in '68, we had maybe 3 or 4 players that had NHL experience. We had a great goalie in Glenn Hall. We had a big defense. We could check. We could play tight. We lost 4 straight, 2 games in overtime, and Canadians were still a great team. I mean, that was in 1968, and if you look at the team, Canadians they won the cup in '65 and '66. They claimed the best team they had was '67, and Toronto won that series. And then Montreal came back and won in '68 and '69. So, you know, they still were, that's a dynasty for Montreal that doesn't get talked about because of the 50s and because of the 70s. But we played tight hockey. The one team we couldn't play tight hockey against was one of the greatest teams of all time, the 1970 Boston Bruins. They won 59 games. And, you know, we got up against them, and we tried everything. I had somebody shadowing Bobby Orr. He was that great a player, but we couldn't handle the other players, and they were able to. But the last game, the elimination game, the great picture of Bobby scoring the clinching Stanley Cup goal in overtime. You know, we had the lead in that game. We had the lead. I think we were leading 3-2. We got a penalty in the third period, and they tied it up. And of course, it lasted less than a half a minute. But if you got a hockey team that can check and keep the puck out of your own net, and the Lightning proved that. I mean, you know, they came close in 15 against the Hawks. They got knocked out in 19, 4 straight by Columbus, because Columbus checked them into the ice. But give a lot of credit to the Lightning many people in on it. Whoever scouted them, whoever drafted, or whoever made the trades we know it's Julian Brisebois, but and people. There's a lot of people in an organization. Getting Goodrow and Coleman that was the final pieces of the puzzle, and I've heard them say it themselves.
I should ask you the question that I suspect everybody is expecting me to ask you, which is, who are you cheering for in this series? And we, of course, assume it was the Canadiens, but was it?
It was tough because I'd been in Montreal, but that was in the 70s. And I really, it was a no loss for me because either team I could accept the fact. I knew Montreal was the underdog. The Lightning people, I can't say enough about them. I mean, I go to all the home games for the last, like even when Steve Yzerman took over the team 2010, I don't think I hardly missed a home game except for the last pandemic. And, so I got to know that team better than any, but I wasn't saying this team has to win. I wasn't watching the game. A lot of times you're watching games and you're so nervous and you're pulling for one team and the other. That wasn't the case with myself. I could live with either team winning the cup, and it would be good memories on both sides.
I should also ask you about dynasties, because you're a guy who's been associated with, one in Montreal and one in Detroit and one in Pittsburgh, and let's put Chicago on the list too. Are the Tampa Bay Lightning, in your view now, a dynasty?
Well, originally, and in the book I did with Ken Dryden, when we were trying to find out the top 8 teams of all time, not of all time, going back to I think we decided to go from the late 40s up to present day, and we tried to figure out teams that won a minimum of 4 times and I think first it was 4 and 5. Then we stretched it to 4 and 6, and we needed an 8th team. We went to 3 and 6, and that's how we picked Chicago, the final one. But it's so difficult now. I mean, a dynasty to me is not a fair word because we're in different chartered waters right now. We got this salary cap, and more so now than ever because the cap is kind of frozen for the next 3 years because of the pandemic, because of they had to keep the league going. The owners were able to make an extension, but without crowds, I mean, players pretty well made a good deal, and the owners made a good deal to keep labor peace. So I don't know if you say it's a dynasty. I think it's a tremendous accomplishment for any team to win a Stanley Cup. It's a great accomplishment for teams to win 2 in a row. So the dynasty word doesn't work for me because I think it's overused and it's not the same. It's like you asking me to compare a player that played 50 years ago with one today. It's not easy.
Well, one of the reasons we are so happy to speak to you this evening is because we not only wanted your analysis of the Stanley Cup final that just transpired, but we also, because you've been to the final so many times, wanted to get your sense about what a coach has to do to make sure before game 1 that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. So take us back, if you like, to that first series before I guess the first post-expansion Stanley Cup final. You're the coach of the St. Louis Blues. How nervous were you going into that first Stanley Cup final in terms of thinking, have I done everything I possibly can to prepare my team for success?
Well, you brought up quite a story. We won the 7th game against Philadelphia in the first round of the West Division. We went into the 7th game against Minnesota into double overtime on a Friday night. And we finally won on a goal in the second overtime to eliminate Minnesota. That was on a Friday night. I think the game was over. It was after midnight because Ron Schock scored the goal. And I have a picture at my basement of the clock is ticking about 20 minutes after 12 when he scored. And the final started on Sunday afternoon. It was a national game. We were at the rink till about 2 or 3 in the morning trying to really, you're so enthused about getting into the final. But no, coach, I mean, it depends if you have time to prepare. But you watch as much as you can. I mean, in those days we didn't have television like they have today. So I don't think it was a fair comparison when I first started. Maybe when I got to Montreal in the 70s, it was different because our team in St. Louis, I mean, we lost 3 straight series, in 4 games. 2 of the series were fairly close, the first 2. The third one wasn't close. We got slammed by Boston, and I didn't feel any shame for the team, and I thought we did as well as we could play. But then in going into the 70s, it was a lot different. The high scoring, and we had great goaltending. I remember the first cup run in 73 that I had with Montreal. We went into Chicago. We won the first 2 at home, and we won the third. And I think we won they won the third, and we won the fourth. We came home to win the Stanley Cup in Montreal, which we only did once out of the 5 that I was on in Montreal. The other 4 were on the road. Do you know what the score was in game number 6? Game number 5, we're up 3-1. 2 of the greatest goalies of the 70s, Ken Dryden in our net, Tony Esposito in Chicago. They came into Montreal. It was on a Sunday afternoon. They beat us 8-7. 8-7. And then we went to Chicago to win the cup, and we won on an empty net goal, 6-4. 25 goals in 2 games in the 70s. But they were abnormal games, and it wasn't because of the goaltending. It just all of a sudden goals started going in. But we won't see those kind of games again. But as a coach, you try to you don't want to change a lot going into the playoffs. The finals, you got a little bit better chance in the finals to know a lot more about the other team because they've probably done the same as you. They've been successful. The only thing I can say is each of the rounds that you go in, you're playing a team that won the previous round until you get in the finals. So, you're playing a very successful team. So there's not much chance of you not taking that team as seriously as you can, and you prepare the best you can.
I do want to ask one follow-up question, though, about your first time to the Stanley Cup final, because I guess this is worth reminding everybody. You lost your first 12 straight Stanley Cup final games.
Right.
Did you ever wonder whether you were ever going to win a Stanley Cup?
Sure. As a coach, you always think, can I win one? And then I got a little bit of security. I've won a Stanley Cup. But you're right. And then it didn't end in Montreal because, we won in 6 games in 73. And then we swept the Flyers in 76 and the Bruins in 77, but took 6 games in 78 to beat Boston out in couple in overtime. And then Rangers in 79 in the final, they came in and won game 1 at the Forum, and we won the next 4. But then when I moved on to Pittsburgh, like Jeremy was mentioning, that series, Tom Barrasso was just outstanding in that playoff series. He won a game in Chicago, game 3, 1-0, and that was a great goaltending. But then I go to Detroit, and they're a high-scoring team. We get knocked 4 straight by the New Jersey Devils. How did they beat us? Similar team to the way that teams win today. They just had great goaltending. They had an awesome defense core, and they had 4 lines coming at you. A few great players, but a team. And they gave us a lesson in how you can beat a team. And we had a pretty good offensive team. We just didn't have the defense. And we learned about. I learned about you got to be able to keep the puck out of your own net. And then we went to in 97 and 98. We were able to have a really good all-round team. Play offense when you need it. Play defense when it's important, and which is mostly all in the playoffs. So I'm a big fan of teams that can know how to play both ways. And if you can't do a lot of offense, you better be super defense. I think an all-out defensive team has a better chance to beat an all-out offensive team because it doesn't matter. You're going to score to win, but you have to be able to defend the lead. Nothing showed it more to me than the game last night. And that team play. I know the goalie made saves at the right time, but they weren't inundated. They could smell the idea that this is going to be a Stanley Cup in front of their home fans. And no disgrace to Montreal, because I think a lot of people had written them off, but they proved in other series. I mean, we're going to be there right to the very. And they were. I mean, you lose and you get knocked out of the Stanley Cup, and you took your goalie out and had 6-on-5. That shows what kind of team you had.
I'm assuming before the St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup Finals that you probably deep down thought we're not likely going to win this thing. But I wonder, for every subsequent, certainly with the Habs in the late 70s when you had the 4 in a row, and then again with Detroit and with Pittsburgh, did you know every time you won the cup that you were going to win?
It's a crazy thing to think and say, but I've been on both sides of 3-0, up 3 games to nothing, and down 3 games to nothing. So I'll take the one. I think 5 times we swept and 4 times we lost. So going up 3-0 as a coach, the one thing that's on your mind is I don't want this team to win the first game. I don't want to be the coach, and I don't want this team to be involved that we won the first 3, and it only happened once. It only happened once in the Stanley Cup playoffs that a team in 1942, the Detroit Red Wings, had a 3-0 lead, and Toronto made a lot of changes, and they won 4 straight. And then at the same time, when you're down 3-0, you don't think you're out. You keep thinking, I want to be like the Toronto Maple Leafs of 1942, and I want to win that game 4 and take my chances from then on. And that's what, it's a crazy way to operate, but I was more nervous in game 4 when I was ahead 3 games to nothing. And I mean, the odds are totally with you. I mean, it's got to be 100-1 that you're not gonna blow the cup win when you're up 3. But when you're involved and you're thinking about it, don't give the other team a life.
What are the superstitions that you would have followed in the final round to ensure victory?
Same route on the bus. The bus, you never get the same bus driver. Sit in the front of the bus, even though it's an easy ride to wherever you're going. Know how you won a game the game before. We want to travel the same. You get lucky shirts. You get lucky, well, not as much shirts as because you're changing them. You get lucky jackets. You get lucky ties. I mean, you go overboard. I mean, but I guess it's just to get your mind off. I never wanted 13. It's funny, and my last year I ever coached, and he's the only player that isn't in the Hall of Fame that should be because he's still playing, and he was a rookie, Pavel Datsyuk, and we had him at number 13, but before him I think we had he was the first number 13 I ever had, and I was so superstitious. I don't know how you do it, but I wouldn't go any hotel that the rooms added up to 13. And in the Royal York Hotel, they only go from, that was in Toronto when we used to stay there, they go from 12 to 14. So I don't want the 14th floor because that's really the 13th. So that's how crazy you get.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's good to know. Okay, how about this? In the deciding games of a Stanley Cup final, when you are winning, do you allow yourself to start to think before the game is over about what the post-game rituals are going to look like, how I'm going to hoist the cup, who I'm going to get it from, where I'm going to stand in that team picture on the ice? At what point do you start thinking about all that stuff?
Just that when the game is over, as it appears, nothing's pre-planned. I mean, you don't think of any of those. I mean,
You did once, Scotty. Now you did once. You left early once to get your skates on.
Well, no, that's 3 seconds to go, and we finally scored an empty net goal. And
okay.
I left as soon as the game was ending, but everything was ready. I had planned my last night. It was my last game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about this? We talked to JR, and I'd like to get your views on the post-series handshake. We know that Billy Smith famously never liked to do it. How about you? How important do you think that shaking hands after a series is over is to the game?
I can tell you, when I first started coaching and we had the benches across from each other, the coaches did not participate in the line. I mean, you'd search out the coach if you could after the game. I mean, I went twice against Don Cherry, and we would meet in the hallway after the game somewhere. I'd make sure, or he would make sure he sees me, or whatever we did. But when the benches were across from each other, the coaches didn't go into the line. I think I'm trying to recall when it started. Not in 70s, must have been, I don't even know if we did it in the 70s. I'm not sure. I think it was even after that the coaches, but you know, I mean, there's been a few players. I had one that played for me in St. Louis, one of the greatest defensemen of all time, Doug Harvey, and the game was over. He went in the room. I don't know about this. I think Jerry Cheevers, he might have gone to see a goalie or see a player, but he didn't go in the line. Billy Smith maybe didn't do it. That's up to you. I mean, there's traditions. I think it's one of the great traditions when you see how these players, they battle each other for up to 7-game series sometimes, and yet when it's over, it's over. And what I always felt pretty tough was when the cup is won, there's such a feeling for a team, especially ones, you know, especially like, well, even last night, I think when you look at the Lightning last night, they had a great celebration. It's in front of their home fans. They had their families not on the ice at this time. But the other team that lost, it takes a good 5 minutes, maybe longer. And I think the captains usually, they start, you know, oh, we better start the line. Because it's a real tough feeling when you're the losing team. And you naturally you're gonna congratulate the other team, but that's probably the toughest part for a losing team, that they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and you can't, you know, the winning team is so excited that you know, you can't put a fault in it.
Now, do you recall during the course of the many handshake lines that you would have participated in, do you recall having had any, you know, really memorable or meaningful conversations with any of the players or coaches on the other team? I know many, many years ago, it was sort of a perfunctory congratulations and move along, but it seems nowadays that the conversations are longer. What are your memories on that?
Well, Jeremy was a very tough competitor, but he was such a friendly person after the games. I remember with the Pittsburgh game, and I didn't coach Jeremy, but you had him on before. And he was always a very popular player when the game was over. And, you know, he took it upon himself to be a gentleman like he was in those days and is. And I've had players come up to me. I remember once when we beat Chicago in '73, they were in the lower part of the Chicago Stadium, and Stan Mikita came over from the Blackhawk dressing room. And I had coached against him in junior, and he sought me out. And I was a rookie coach just about in the Stanley Cup Finals. I mean, I wasn't rookie, but I was with Montreal, and he sought me out. And the only other time, I mean, it's happened, I'm trying to remember everything, but when I was with the Hawks and I was in their dressing room in 2000, it would be, I think, 13. And coming down the corridor from the Boston dressing room, he poked his head in to look for me, and it was Jaromir Jagr. And I had him as an 18-year-old rookie with Pittsburgh. He was 19 because he was 18 because he got drafted in '90, and I think he was drafted. He was on 2 Cup winners. So he was with Bob Johnson first, and then he was with me the second time, and he came along. So, you know, once it's over, it's over. You can't take it with you. I mean, you know, if you lose, you lose, and you have to move on. And that it's a tough thing when you imagine how successful Montreal was this year, and when the toughest feeling is when you lose in the final. That's the toughest feeling. There's no question. I mean, it's never good to lose. and it's never a good feeling. But it's really tough when you were down to the last two teams out of 32, and now it's 31. 31, it'll be 32, and you're the two out of 31, and you're the last one. It's tough.
Scotty, I want to be respectful of your time because we've been going a half an hour now, which is terrific. I want to ask you a couple of more quick questions if I can. Who, in your view, is the best coach in the National Hockey League ever who didn't win a Stanley Cup?
Did not win. Oh, I can't go back a long way. I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at the teams that we played against, but it's so hard to pick one. It's so hard to pick one now. I mean, the coaches are so experienced now, and you know, the top 10 guys that coach and win. It's just so. It's time consuming. They have but they have staff. Your staff is so important. You have people that work for you, but to pick a coach that never won a Stanley Cup and going against them, I can't pick any right now.
Okay, last question. Every time we talk to you, you just dazzle us with how much you know about stuff. So I'm going to try this one. These people, Scotty, all have something in common. Scott Bowman, Daryl Sittler, Ralph Backstrom, John Diefenbaker, and my brother Jeff Paikin. What do they all have in common?
Birthday.
You came through again. That is right. So you're all born on September 18th. Very true.
Okay, good.
Scotty, that was a joy for you to. It was a joy for you to join us. Joy for us to have you join us tonight. Thank you so much for doing so.
I really enjoyed your conversation with JR, and you know, I remember before I go, he broke into the league in the playoffs with he came out of the Hull Juniors with Chicago, and you know they played St. Louis. I was doing television at the time, and you know who broke in with the Blues? He came in from Michigan State. Rod Brindamore. And those two players went against each other. I'm going to say it's 1989. I could be out by a year. But they both came in, and they must have been just 20 years old. And I'm telling you, they both had a very dominating series against each other. Rod Brindamore with the Blues and Jeremy Roenick with Chicago. And look at the career they both had. It's amazing.
Yep. Well, this is the part of our program where we love to have Paul and Laura and Glenn come on in and visit us and thank you, and also have their comments on what we've seen over the last 90 minutes. So, gang, if you're out there waiting in the wings, there's Glenn Dreyfus coming to us from the home of the Kraken, and then Laura is here and Paul's around somewhere. Glenn, come on in here with your comments.
Okay, Steve. You know, you have Scotty Bowman on, a fine wine, exceptional, smooth tasting, wonderful vintage, just memorable in every way. And before that, you have Jeremy Roenick, you know, the spicy jambalaya, just fiery, delicious, memorable. What am I supposed to do? I'm like that crusty piece of bread behind the refrigerator. Hey, now that you've had that fine wine and that great meal, why don't you stick around for a crusty loaf of bread? So thanks a lot, Steve.
Okay, Glenn, that was great.
All right,
I'm not following that.
Okay, all right. I have a little bit of content for you so that I'm not just your grumpy uncle.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeremy Roenick played only 58 games with the LA Kings, but it must have impressed Hollywood because he played on so many TV series. He was on Arliss as himself. He was on Bones as himself. He was on the soap opera One Life to Live. And then he even branched out on a show called Leverage. He was a security guard. On The Ghost Whisperer, he played coach. On Heist, he was a police officer. And on the show Hack, they promoted him, and he spent 2 episodes as a desk sergeant. So that is an acting career a lot of people in LA would give an arm and a leg for. So Jeremy Roenick has had a lot of careers.
He has. I think he beats Gretzky on that because I think Wayne did one guest shot in one soap opera one time.
Oh, wow.
So he's had a lot of careers. I'm still waiting for one.
There's Paul Patsko. Come on in here, Paul, and give us your comments for Scotty.
Yeah, I can't follow what Glenn talked about, but I wanted to say hi to Scotty and thank you for coming on because it's amazing all the things that you know. You're so good. And by the way, we're going to ask you when the memorabilia show is on in November, if you want to come by and talk about your cards and stuff, because I think you're going to have a great time with that. So we'll let you know when that's going to happen. And all that. Yep.
I should also
I would like to do that. Thank you.
Great. It's in Toronto, of course, but we'll take you around. We'll show you, and Glenn's going to interview you.
Oh, you just blew the deal, Paul.
Yeah, no, Scotty, you got a tremendous collection, and we want to talk about it some more that day. So, but this was great tonight, boys. Jeremy Roenick and Scotty, boy, this can't get better than this.
Well, I got to say, 1933 must have been a very good year because that was the year in August that my dad was born, and he's the greatest man I know. And in September of that year, Scotty Bowman was born, and he's the greatest hockey coach I know. Yeah. So there was something about 33 that's a pretty good year. Okay, Laura, it's over to you to close things out.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Scotty, for joining us. You're always welcome. Like, anytime you want to come and join us, please.
Okay.
I know you have other things to do.
Tied up with the hockey, so.
Yeah,
it's good. It's not good. It's over, but we can get on and do some other things. It was a good ride, and I only missed that I didn't see any of the games, But there'll be more games coming up. And thanks again,
Scotty,
for the invite.
one more thing.
Thank you, Paul.
It's not really over. Yeah. It's only like 2 weeks until the expansion draft and the amateur draft, and there's like no off season at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can always send you old games to watch too.
Yeah, they don't take time off now. You're right. Yeah, it's a big business. Yeah. Well, thanks
Laura,
a lot,
closing
guys,
comment for our audience?
Okay.
Thank you, Scotty.
So thank you, Scotty. If everyone liked this program, can you do us a favor and click the link below that says like? And if you want to find out when we go live, click the subscribe button and the little bell, and it'll notify you every time we go live. And we will be on our Zoom after this. So if you need the link, then just email us, hockeytimemachine@gmail.com. Otherwise, we will see you next week.